Alright, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a sequel of a video that I did pretty well, and that was top 10 Digimon that aren't in Cyber Sleuth but totally should be. So I'm going to do 10 more Digimon that aren't in Cyber Sleuth and totally should be, and this time it is heavily inspired by Digimon that were in Digimon World Dawn and Dusk but aren't in Cyber Sleuth. So we're going to start off with a Digimon that is in the game's data but was cut due to time restraints, and that is Baluchimon. He is a member of Kowloon Co. in Digimon World Dusk, so they were planning on having all 4 members. Of course, they did include Ghoulmon, Baluchimon, and Xtyrannomon, so this is the 4th member. He's an ultimate level, 2 equip slots, 14 memory, and kind of middling stats, and you'll see why in a second because I kind of balanced him around his support skill. So the aforementioned support skill is Grave Bone, which will increase enemy CD upon death. So CD is basically how long it takes before you move again on the timeline. So in this game, when you die, your CD is frozen. When you're revived, you're brought back on the timeline based on where your CD was when you died. So the idea would be that if you died while he's on the field, you would increase your CD, and therefore when you're revived would be lower down on the timeline. A lot of times when I design these Digimon, I kind of think of how they could be played in a meta setting by really skilled people, what they could do with them. So a Digimon like this, I think people could use this and do a lot of crazy things. And, you know, it's not too exact on whether it would like double their CD or add to it a specific amount. I think that stuff would have to be figured out through testing that I can't really do. His Sig skill is Deadly Fear, which is just a magic attack, 110 dark damage. It's basically just Taomon's Sig skill, very generic. As I said, his stats themselves are kind of spread out to balance around the fact that he has this crazy ability to increase enemy CD upon death, which very well might be extremely powerful. Next up is another Kowloon Co. member, but this time from Digimon World Dawn, and that's Waru Siegerman. Had to include this guy because he is the best comic relief in the game. Love him so much as a character. So his stats are pretty much exactly the same as Mega Siegerman, but he's a virus. But the cool part comes from his support skill, Malevolent Scale. So it's kind of the opposite of Siegerman's in-game, but a little bit different. So I worded it such that enemy stats are always treated as normal. So this will not only nullify things like Mental Charge Field, but I decided, you know, let's see it also stop things like Sukuyamon's Adroit Wisdom or Crimson Mode's plus 10 to all stats. So it'd be kind of neat, maybe you could see this Digimon being used to hinder enemy teams who try to use multiple stat boosting abilities. I mean, he is just an ultimate level Digimon with kind of meddling stats as it is, so, you know, this could be a pretty neat support skill to really bring him around. His Sig skill is Dark Storm, which is just an AoE magic attack. Pretty standard. Not trying to go too crazy with him. Up next is the last member of Kowloon Co. between Dusk and Dawn, and that is Spiderman, who was from Kowloon Co. and Dawn. So he's largely has his stats based around Xtyrannomon's base form, but with a little bit of nerfs here and there, and that's because although he is a huge tanky beast, his support skill, which only affects himself, is Sonic/Rain, which gives him the ability to counterattack when he's hit by physical or magic attacks. This is like Veltgeist from Jesmon, but it's always active. So, I mean, he's already a fire virus, which is kind of neat to see in the meta, but a Digimon that attacks back when you hit it would be kind of a neat way to put checks against into Digimon. I think it'd be pretty interesting to see how you play out in the meta. Blue Prominence is his Sig skill of 25 SP, physical attack, 120 big bungus damage, increases attack by 10%. He is very similar to Xtyrannomon base form, but with a pretty cool gimmick. Up next is Eaglemon. So wind is always my favorite things in like fantasy and stuff, so in Digimon I like the attribute wind as well. So his stats are kind of mid, and you'll see why in a second. And it's not because his support skill is Wind Guardians, although it's a nice support skill to have for either themed teams or just his own abilities, because we're going to give him Kaiser Phoenix, which is a physical attack that does 200 wind damage to one foe and cannot move from recoil for 1 turn. So it's just Brave Metal from Digimon, but put onto a vaccine, which is wind. So, you know, I think he's basically kind of like Arrow Vidramon, but a little bit better after the first turn. You know, I think it'd be kind of interesting to see in the metagame. He might make it kind of dangerous for Digimon like Lucamon to run around without extra defense investment. Who knows? But largely, I just want to see a really cool wind Digimon, so had to put this guy in. Up next is Ghoulmon or Deathmon. So his design is very lore inspired. So even though he's a fallen angel Digimon, he tends to try not to conspire to evil. So he's a neutral virus. His stats are kind of defensive. You know, he's kind of all around bulky, and you'll see why in a second. And that's because his support skill Fallen decreases damage from light and dark skills from all Digimon on the field by 15%. So that's kind of neat to plop down in the meta where light and dark are so prevalent. A Digimon who kind of hinders that a little and is a bit of a tank himself. Death Wave is his Sig skill of 30 SP, magical attack, 100 neutral damage to all foes, 30% chance to inflict confusion. So having a 30% chance to inflict confusion when you're hitting 3 guys at once means you're probably going to hit it against 1 guy. AoE magic attack's nice too. He's very similar to Belphamon's Sleep Mode, honestly, in a lot of ways, but of course he's going to play a little bit differently. Up next is Xtyrannomon. I love this guy's design. He's just so cute. I had to put him in. Didn't really know what to do with him at first, so I kind of made him similar to Monzaemon, at least in his stats. You can see they're very similar, because he's also a puppet Digimon, so he's a vaccine neutral. So the idea was I wanted him to be sort of this disruptive support that you could plop down on a team and use. So Plush Buddy is a support skill which cuts the rate of normal statuses received by 50%. So this is exactly the same as Slightmon or Kentaurousmon's support skill. And of course, if you combine that with one Master Barrier or another copy of itself, you'll have complete protection against statuses, because percents in this game are added up and then calculated. It's not 50% on top of 50%, which would be 75%. It's 50 plus 50 equals 100, then translated to a percent. Dangerous Zipper is his SIG skill, 15 SP, so it's basically just Gatomon's SIG skill, but with more fixed damage. I think fixed damage would be an interesting thing to see be used in PvP, so 500 is a pretty good number to work with. Of course, you also have a 60% chance of confusing, just like Gatomon's SIG skill has. Overall, like I'm saying, I think he'd be a pretty cool little support Digimon to see plopped onto a team. Devitamamon is here. So his stats are just Digitamamons, but with 500 extra HP and 100 extra attack. He's a destructive little guy, as the lore says. So his SIG skill is Destruction Egg. All of your Digimon's attacks absorb 5% of the damage dealt as SP. So that's honestly a very good SIG skill, even at only 5%. Like, that is going to get you to the point where late game you're not going to need to use drains as much, or maybe at all. And his stats are pretty decently defensive, even if his SP is really low and his int's kind of low. His SIG skill is Black Death Cloud, which will reduce 25% of HP from one enemy and inflict sleep. So that's just like Mastamon's SIG skill, where 25% of their current HP is gone, and then it always inflicts sleep. I think it's cool to see Digimon that have inherent ways to inflict statuses in the meta, kind of like Grand Dracmon has, where otherwise you might not see it on Digimon, but it's kind of neat to see it pop up every once in a while. So overall, I think this guy's kind of like a nice defensive guy who goes for the long game and has some interesting support options. So I cheated and kind of this is the same one, so technically there's 11 Digimon on this list, but I had to include it, and it's Holy Digitamamon. And all we know about this Digimon is this one sprite art, his name, and the name of one of his attacks. He has not been officially introduced yet. He kind of like was designed a long time ago, but I think it'd be cool to see him introduced, so I would love to see him in Cyber Sleuth. So much like how Devitamamon had Digitamon's stats, but with 100 to 1 stat and 50 or 500 from his 2 HP, and another stat, and he was dark. This guy is light instead and has 50 more SP and 100 more int. So obviously he's meant to be more of a caster type. So Love Egg is his support skill, which reduces all damage received by 5% and converts it to HP. So this is much like Lucamon Satan Mode's Gehenna ability, but it's for all damage and only 5%, because he is only an 18 memory Digimon. He's not some big high memory costed guy. We're not trying to make him too broken here or anything, but it is a nice little thing. And his SIG skill is Holy Dream, so all we had to work off was the name, because that's all we have for this Digimon. So I decided to say it restores all HP for one party member, but also inflicts sleep. So that's pretty crazy to have a complete HP restore for one of your Digimon, but at the downside of putting them to sleep. So of course I'm thinking that if they have 2 Master Barrier, they won't be put to sleep because they'll be immune to the status, so that's kind of a neat way you can build a team around it. Also, sleep's not such a bad condition to be hit by, because it only lasts for 1 to 3 turns, so this could be a pretty cool Digimon to have on a team. Keep your guys alive. Overall, just do some general supporting. Up next is Skull Mammoth Mon, and sadly Mammoth Mon's not in the game either, but you know, I would have added both of them if I wasn't trying to make this list shorter. So we just went with the big guy. The big guy himself here is a Vaccine Earth 18 memory. 2 slots, because it's kind of countering the fact that he's such a defensive Digimon, and frequently they give super defensive Digimon like 1 less item slot or whatever. So he's got 2000 base HP, which is the most amount of HP any Digimon in the game would have if he was in the game. Low SP to counteract the fact that he's obviously trying to survive for a long time. Decently high attack, high defense, lowish int, and really bad speed. I mean, he's only an 18 memory after all. Ironclad defense as his ability. Very straightforward. It's already a support skill that's in the game. I mean, it's very clear this guy's just meant to stay on the field. And a Spiral Bone Crusher for a SIG skill, hitting for 130 earth damage. You don't see a lot of earth damage, so it's kind of cool to have. Like, this guy's got lots of physical potential. He's super, super bulky. And honestly, it'd be kind of neat to go full int on him too, because that'd make him really bulky and you could have some neat healing options. I'd love to see this guy in the game for many reasons, but I think the way I designed will make him really cool to play with. So moving on to an honorable mention from my last video, it is Boncho Liliman, and originally I thought she was a virus, but it turns out she's a data, but I can work with that anyway, so I made her into a pretty cool little Digimon. So much like how Devitamamon and Holy Digitamamon had Digitamamon stats, but with 50 and then 100 added, she has 500 extra HP and 100 extra attack. And this of course means that because she otherwise has the Lilimon stats, she has a lot of SP, int, and decent speed to work with. So the interesting thing about her is her ability, Black Lily, which only affects herself, but it ignores bad matchups when attacking. So this means she can attack virus Digimon and not have her damage halved. It gives her the ability free types have to swing into anything and do decent damage, but also the benefits of being a data and being able to hit vaccines for extra damage. And her SIG skill Absolute Territory, 25 SP, but it hits 3 to 5 times physically for 30 plant damage to one foe. So this one hits pretty hard, and it can do some variable damage. Overall, I think Boncho Liliman would be a pretty interesting Digimon to use on a team because she would just be able to dish out damage indiscriminately, and I think you can see some unexpected plays from her, and I think her stats are pretty neat to work with based on the fact that they're based on Lilimon stats. So the last Digimon on here was a really cool Digimon that I knew from the start that I wanted to include, and I'm really happy with how he turned out, and that's a Nubismon. So he's kind of expensive, only 2 slots, Vaccine Light, has decent HP, really high SP, kind of low defense, high int, okay speed. But the interesting thing, and I knew right from the beginning he was going to have this ability, is the support skill Gravekeeper. So when you revive your allies, it reduces their CD. Again, just like Baluchimon, I'm not sure if this would have their CD or lower it by a set amount, but I just think it'd be cool to see some crazy plays of a Nubismon where he's bringing back your guys and they're moving like way quicker than they would have, and they're like going right away to attack again. Reviving is such a big part of competitive PvP that it'd be cool to see a Digimon who interacts with it in some way like that. So his SIG skill had to go through some work because originally it was just a magic damage high nuke, and I realized that meant that it would affect weaker Digimon in the meta more than stronger Digimon. So I remedied this by making it a pen move. By making it a pen move, it means that Digimon of huge amounts of int will be affected by this more, and Digimon of small amounts of int will be affected by it less than if it was just a huge int nuke. Pen moves themselves, I'm not really a huge fan of pen moves, but this one, I kind of like it. So Ahmed is a 30 SP int penetrating strong dark attack on one foe, but power doubles versus dark Digimon. So thematically, that's because this attack is used to judge the soul of the Digimon that it's attacking, and it attacks their Digicore directly, so making it a pen move is also thematic, and I should have thought about that right from the beginning, honestly. Either way, this would be a pretty cool thing to see in the metagame. It would hit Xtyrannomon for about 700, Gallantmon Crimson Mode for about 1500, sadly, because it would be 3 times effective. But you gotta take what you get with this stuff, because it would also hit Lucimon Satan Mode for a ton of damage as well. Also, it could hit things like Taomon for decent damage. Honestly, I think it'd be a pretty cool SIG skill to see thrown around as a pen move in the meta. I definitely think a Nubismon would be a pretty powerful Digimon if he was in the game. Well, this has been fun. I always like designing things and being creative, but if you like what you saw, sub for Spub and come back for more, because I'm a huge fan of Digimon and I'll probably keep on talking about it in the future. And you know what? If you got any ideas of Digimon to learn in the game that you would love to see in the game, post about it in the comments, because I'd love to discuss and find out what other ideas people have about Digimon that could be in the game and how they could be implemented. Anyway, I'll catch you guys later. Sub for Spub, folks.